Welcome to America This Week Live on Monday. I don't know what is it, the 29th?
It's strange. I mean, I've lost track of the days in terms of number and in terms of title. It's Monday. Uh,
I think it is Monday.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm used to telling time by this broadcast, and when we take a week off, I'm wandering in the desert. I have no idea. And I've had an especially chaotic Christmas. I won't give away the secret of my distress and misery, but I had an accident in my house that
Yeah,
caused
Walter had a very hard Christmas.
that caused my office to be uninhabitable. So I'm not at my grandpa's house, even though people think I'm a grandpa's age. I'm at an old railroad hotel in Livingston, Montana, the Murray Hotel. It's one of those hotels that prides itself on having Charlie Chaplin once stay there, and the world's tallest man, and people like that way back when, Theodore Roosevelt. So it kind of looks like Theodore Roosevelt days behind me. And at least I'm warm and safe. That's what
Yeah,
counts.
no, but it's a massive bummer.
Yeah.
Sorry that it happened to you. And I hope everybody else had a less eventful and happier Christmas.
It was an incredibly spiritual Christmas, is the way I would put it. On
Okay.
on the material plane, it left something to be desired. On the spiritual plane, I got to know who my true friends were, loved my family, didn't have to give that many gifts. I was in a situation in which you're not expected to give gifts.
That's a great idea. Maybe I should do that. I mean, I'm not much of a gift person, but
You're getting one in a couple of days, and maybe by Thursday you'll have it. And
oh wow,
Matt, I hazard to say that it may be the best gift you've gotten from a non-family member in your life,
wow.
because and I'm going to keep people in suspense about what it is, because Matt's going to, I don't know if he'll be home by then, but when he sees it, let's just put it this way. It has to do with a major fight that involved two of the greatest fighters of all time
Oh man. Okay,
back
I'm already guessing. This is
back in the
great.
1970s. I saw it in a San Francisco store. I couldn't believe it existed. And I went, that is Matt Taibbi's soul in, a,
Oh, man.
in physical form. And it was no question but that you had to get it. So we'll
I don't
see.
even want to guess which one it is. Maybe Thrilla, Manila, maybe. No, it's got to be Rumble in the Jungle. But we'll see. I'm looking
Could
forward to
it?
it. Yeah.
Could it be number two?
Yeah, I was going to say it had to be. If it was going to be anyone, it would be that. Walter, that sounds awesome. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for indulging the both of us this week and today. We're both not in our normal places. I had to drive through the Everglades today because of several canceled flights and some other lunacies. So I'm in Florida, but it took a little while to get here, so apologize for the late start. A lot of crazy stuff happened in the last week, so much so that it would be absurd for us even to try to get to all of it. I think, is that an accurate assessment, Walter?
Well, will it still be 2025 on Thursday?
No, but we're gonna do. I think we should do in America this year
Yeah,
on,
exactly.
on Thursday.
If we're expected to sum up the year, which I guess we will try a little bit to do this episode, it's going to be jam packed. If we're expected to sum up the month, it will be jam packed.
Yeah, even the week
But
would be tough. But chat, what do we think about that? Do we think that in America this year, like a summation of all the craziest, stupidest stuff of the year would be a good thing? I
well,
think it would be a fun
I,
idea.
I I think it would be. But Matt, you know me, always looking at things from the negative space. I want to discuss what didn't happen last year that everybody expected, because when I looked at my list, I realized, wow, we didn't end up in a war with Iran. We didn't end up with galloping inflation. We didn't end up with, riots in the streets. We didn't end up with, mass arrests. all the things that people last January, around the time of the inauguration, were thinking would come, didn't. Different things did.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I already see these sort of biggest stories, biggest uncovered stories of the year stories, that come out. I actually once edited the the sort of annual America Uncensored um, compilation, which goes through the most overlooked stories of the year, which are typically um, usually they're sort of corporate excess,
Malfeasance.
corporate malfeasance, banking malfeasance, some kind of corruption story that's been overlooked that's huge, a pollution story that gets spiked, or that only some small outlet covers.
Pollution. What an anachronistic word you just
I know, I
you
know.
just spoke.
But it's true that they do have these awful oil.
No,
You
I
know,
know. I long for pollution. You see, I'm a bit of an environmentalist, and every environmental issue is absorbed into climate change, and we lost the particular, species-based and oil spill-based stories of the old days, which I pine for, because we can actually do something about them.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, typically these stories are it's usually characterized as something that the powers that be don't want you to see, and so everybody sort of by general agreement agrees not to cover it. Pentagon corruption is sort of an annual thing that never gets in there. Pentagon waste is always 50 times bigger than every other waste story in the world. But this year there were a couple of kinds of stories that I think were really interesting. As you pointed out, there was a kind of a dog that didn't bark thing that happened with the corporate press, the old school corporate press, where there would be dire predictions of imminent collapse because of policy X. I'm thinking specifically of the tariff situation where there were fairly stark rewrites of what would happen, what should happen, what the explanations were for why certain things certain calamities didn't come to pass. There were a lot of those on the anti-Trump side.
I mean, Trump ended the year with the rosiest, most upbeat, even shrilly upbeat economic speech he could make, and he was finally justified in making it, because we don't have the inflation that was expected. We do have pretty good jobs number. We even have better personal income numbers than we thought. So numbers wise, it was one that a politician can crow about, but there was a time when it was expected to be the absolute veil of tears, once the tariffs hit.
Yeah, once the tariffs hit, and then there was a series of stories like that, right? There was, once these new college speech policies kick in, we did see a little bit of that already this week. This new kind of anti-woke idea that's starting to pop up. On the flip side, though, I think there were a lot of stories about problems in the Trump administration that were overlooked because people are focusing on dumber other stories, like sort of unfounded crazy stuff with like Epstein, for instance, right?
Who expected Epstein to be a story at all this year?
Right, exactly.
Epstein had been consigned to the right-wing conspiracy graveyard, the QAnon, adjacent enthusiasts who were, no longer needed because Trump was in office, basically. I mean, and who expected the Democrats, of all people, to resurrect a scandal that has thus far probably affected them more negatively in terms of involvement. And as you have pointed out, to much derision, a story that, though it always looks like it's going to burst into technicolor madness, so far isn't much.
Yeah, it's always right over the hill, and I get the familiar Russiagate feeling of, yeah, it's coming. Trust us. They're hiding it in the
Right.
next. The story today is Marjorie Taylor Greene talking to the New York Times, and then there's this sort of weird third hand thing where she says, "Well, I could have gotten a list of the victims." Of the other predators from the victims if I wanted to. And
Well,
when
McCarthy could have done that with Hollywood communists too, right? I
right,
mean, a lot of people could have gotten these lists that would have blown everything wide open and then didn't. I mean, I'm sorry, but her and Massey holding down the sort of populist fringe and being the only honest people as Trump came in and compromised has been a thing. And she's now gone officially to the New York Times, so that completes the cycle. But I don't think they ended up looking.
She had the portrait, the one where you stand looking like this.
Right. Exactly. And they don't give you the super saturated black and white treatment that makes you,
right.
look like Marco Rubio in Vanity Fair, like
right.
Manuel Noriega at the eve of apocalypse.
Right. Yeah, there isn't that picture. So yeah, everybody's focusing on that. Meanwhile, arguably today, like, there was a reportedly a scary, well, maybe not scary, but for Russia, the idea of a drone attack that hits the president's house is potentially a serious thing for us if they think we had a hand in it. And here we have Trump meeting with Zelensky as it's happening, not far from where I am right now.
Did they catch him with a joystick in front
of him?
No,
but I mean, the unconcern with that story is just striking compared with the total wig out over the Epstein stuff. But we'll get into that later. Like I don't want to be go on and on about Epstein. That's my personal.
But I will nominate Ukraine in some ways as the undercovered story. I mean, it pops its head up whenever it looks like Trump might, finalize a ceasefire or something. But otherwise, it just goes along. It's been Vietnamized. It's just a background war now.
So the analytical failure says, "Hey, Walter wants Trump supposed to end the Ukraine war. You fucking hack." I guess he's asking how that would be. Well, my answer would be,
I want him to end it.
I think
I sure do. I want everybody to end it.
Yeah, I think the way to do it is just to, pull the funding and say, good luck, and do the same elsewhere, right? Would be my suggestion. But apparently nobody's interested in how exactly. There's just sort of a remarkable paucity of coverage on the Ukraine story, as you point out. So anyway, the story that everybody's waking out today is one that you and I both had significant involvement with. You in the end far more than me. So I think we should address it because we both have particular insight into this. This is something that I traveled to Minnesota quite a lot last year. Ended up not doing a story, which we may be able to get into a little bit later, but it's being kind of swallowed up, this sort of Minnesota feeding our future fraud story, which is far bigger than.
Well, it's feeding our future. It's daycares. It's autism clinics. It's
non-emergency driving.
Yeah, exactly. Non-emergency driving. I mean, and it's now leaking from Minnesota to Ohio to other places. This Nick Shirley, by doing his YouTube video with, or an X post with God knows how many views and
like
reposts.
100 million or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. He has lit a fire for the entrepreneurial young person who, wants to go out with his iPhone and do, do guerrilla reporting. And it's suddenly, it's like the new Pokemon for adults.
Right, and it should be pointed out. Let's give
Pokemon
you
Go.
your own county highway ended up being the outlet that broke really this new iteration of the story that he
Yeah.
jumped off of. But
Yeah.
let's start with the reaction. Can we see SOT 8, which is the MS Now reaction to this?
This is a New York Times writer.
Yeah, it's Mara Gay, and which is can we just preface this? This is amazing because the New York Times actually did cover this story fairly extensively in 2022 when it first came out. They just didn't follow up on other layers of it. And they had headlines like the Minnesota fraud scandal may be worse than you think. Like, they were on it, as Dave Weigel is pointing out. So what she's about to say is really, it's beyond crazy.
These were funds that were meant to go to help feed hungry people during the COVID pandemic, to help keep people in their homes who were at risk of homelessness. So first of all, if there is fraud there, that should be fully investigated, no matter where it is. The question is, why
Can we stop just for a
second?
In
a different
yeah.
What?
I mean,
if there was fraud there have already been dozens of convictions on this. It's not
and she acts as though it's a 1 in 4 possibility that there's fraud. Maybe it's certain that there's fraud, but it's not clear that it's important fraud. But you can tell from her posture and her syntax that she's getting to a big but. If but.
Yes,
and
maybe
what in the world is the but going to be that's going to excuse what $9 billion now estimated fraud? But one is coming, and one is coming from someone who, rather than reporting on the story, is commenting on others reporting on it.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Let's leave what what she has to say there. Otherwise,
the politicization of the DOJ and the FBI is undeniable.
Whoa.
So whether they are reliable narrators is the big question. And this is what happens when you weaponize and politicize federal agencies that are not meant to be.
Can we pause?
Yeah, we got to stop here too. Well, you want to go first on this? Because I have a big one on this.
You go first.
So there are layers to this story that haven't been reported yet. The baseline story is that an enormous school lunch program that was sort of whipped up as an ad hoc solution to COVID for kids who aren't going to be going to school. There were a series of restaurants and other outlets were subcontracted to deliver meals to people at enormous cost, right? And the numbers ended up just not adding up. And I think the number of indictments so far is 78, but there have already been quite a number of convictions. But there is a whole second level to this story where I think what we're going to find out in the end is that the people who are getting busted are lower level folks, and a lot of politicians who had exposure got a free ride. And while I was working on this story, it was the kind of story that was very difficult and to publish, and would have been easier if there were things that were on the record or in court, right? Let's put it that way. So I shopped this to every Trump administration official, prosecutor, because I wanted to get the story out, basically. If they were going to maybe take the information and investigate things that I didn't have access to and indict, then that would have been a way for us to get around some logistical problems that we had. Let's put it that way. And they didn't bite. I was desperate. Actually, more than one of us were desperate for somebody to take an interest in this officially. And even though we didn't do this in Minnesota, we certainly did do this federally. And maybe we were too small time. I don't know. But the notion that the Trump administration was just sitting there waiting for an excuse to politicize this issue and go after, the Somali community in Minnesota, is, I can tell you authoritatively, is erroneous. Not only that, they demonstrated a complete disinterest in going after politicians in Minnesota. So, including some that they do that are some of their, fiercest enemies. So anyway, that's my side. What were you going to say?
Well, on November 12th, the newspaper County Highway that David Samuels and I edit and others edit, published a story by Armin Rosen that was a kind of almost a sweeping collage of all the fraud that was going on in Minnesota and what was known about it and so far and so on, and the involvement of officials and the deterioration of these cities. I'm a Minnesotan. I grew up there. I thought that Minneapolis, St. Paul would probably be the last cities in America to fall into desuetude and anarchy, but I was wrong. And so I have a personal attachment to this story because the place where I first saw the Minnesota Twins is now a very high crime and, desperate area, and a state that it seemed insuperably prosperous, from farms to, iron ore mines to, Fortune 500 companies. It is now really on the ropes in a lot of ways. And now also the center of this image of American state and federal government as fraudulent, which I never thought would happen either. But she is trying to sell us this idea that not just were the DOJ, as you just pointed out, overly aggressive, but that they're the narrators of this story. There were no narrators. Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody was trying to tell the damn story. Many people were telling a part of it. Many people were telling a big part of it going back to 2018. And yet no one was able to somehow fire the imagination of the people, put it into a coherent form. I think post-Doge, it was, government waste has been a little bit more of a vivid issue for Americans, and this is jumbo waste, and it's not just waste, it's premeditated, and, it looks like in many cases it has been and will prove to be criminal fraud of the most organized and, devious fashion, even though it wasn't that devious. A lot of it's been out in the open. So anyway, no one's narrated this story. There's no if about there being fraud. There's no over aggressiveness on the part of the DOJ. Everything you just said, I'm addressing her, was untrue and maybe even deceptive. And what the New York Times is doing, putting these opinion people out there to sort of, soften the blow on a story that America has proved deeply, suddenly concerned with. I don't know.
Yeah, so just to add some context, on September 18th of this year, the 56th defendant to plead guilty in the Feeding Our Future scheme, was pronounced guilty, right? So they had 56 convictions as of September. There's no if there was fraud. There was massive fraud. And by the way, it's a story that has lots of dimensions to it. And
she's literally trying to indict the people who caught the other people, or who noticed. Finally, as you say, you couldn't get you couldn't get a rise out of the Trump administration for a while on this story. You couldn't get a rise out of America on this story. Because I'm a Minnesotan, I pay attention to Minnesota news. I've been watching it for years to some extent in all its variations. But what makes it especially piquant is that the person who oversees this state, and in the real world, we have a hard time imagining that the governor of a state with this multifarious, multi-billion-dollar fraud is completely in the dark about it. Was almost the vice president of the United States.
Yeah, and we'll get to some Walls tape in a moment, but
was pushed on us as one of the best, most avuncular, everyday pheasant hunting, beer drinking dudes ever to come out of the golden grain belt of America. And now we realize that we were defrauded too about Tim Walz, I think. And because this story should have been alive during the presidential election and should have been a huge influence on the race.
It's an awesome 2-scale story about machine politics in the classic sort of Tammany Hall or Richard J. Daley sense, but I would even say that it's bigger because it involves more different types of illegal activity.
And I would say one more thing about her and those of her ilk. If you are truly concerned about children being fed during COVID, if you're truly concerned, let's say, about autism being addressed by these special clinics or daycare for working class people, then you should be way more outraged than the average bear about the fact that none of it happened and the money all got stolen.
Right.
In other words, if these are the programs that concern you most, and these are the people and the dysfunctions that you want addressed most, shouldn't you be? It's like if a militaristic guy found out that they didn't actually build any tanks that year. They built some paper tanks that they put in front of a warehouse, and they said the warehouse is full of them. Well, shouldn't that person be the one who is more outraged? Shouldn't that patriot, that General Patton, really, who cares supposedly about the defense of the United States? So shouldn't you, with your concern for children and the welfare of the man on the street, be infuriated? But instead, you're talking about the narration of it by the DOJ.
It boggles the mind. I think there's also an angle, like if you care about, let's just say, if you think that maybe some wrong was done to the defendants in this case, I do think some of the defendants were overcharged because they were trying to make them out to be bigger fish in the scheme than they really were. And in some of the cases these people actually were providing some services, just not as much as was reported. But
on the meals thing, though, some of it's staggering. I mean, some of these places reported thousands of meals served per day, and they served none.
Yeah, a few of them have video of some people being fed, but they don't have they can't substantiate the sheer amounts that they were charging. Anyway, there's a complete breakdown here. The idea that the DOJ was pushing this narrative. There's a U.S. attorney in Minnesota. It's not like they were cracking the whip on this thing, from the beginning of the Trump presidency. Like, they were.
I think it was we'll get to that maybe situation once we've cleaned everything else up. And because it's a sticky wicket, Matt. I mean, you and I both know, you from some of the reporting you did, me from.
Well, I didn't do it, and that's on me, by the way. I fully should take a lot of shit for not putting this out. So I just want to make that clear. But anyway,
this may be the most honorable. That must be the most honorable confession I've ever seen from a journalist, because you are obligated not at all to even acknowledge that you were considering doing this story. And frankly, I don't know anyone else in journalism who would have acknowledged it. But
no, I mean, I want to acknowledge it because, among other things, I think it's entirely possible that I might have to go back to it. But, there were some things there that let's just say weren't great from my side. And it's because it was such a difficult case. Let's put it that way. I'm glad that there are now eyeballs on it.
Yeah.
But trust me when I say that they haven't explored all the corners of this. They haven't even begun. This is like you know how ever played D&D when you were a kid? And there's like a
Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, there was no Dungeons and Dragons, dude.
Well,
we played with frogs.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, in the game, usually like there's like an opening room of the castle, right? And you spend your first hour sort of dicking around in there, and then you finally find all the cool stuff. 3 days later when you've all smoked all your weed and everything. We're still in the opening room of this story. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of stuff here. It's going to be hard to get out, unfortunately. But
the other thing that you couldn't have known, Matt, when you're weighing your options and making decisions about how you might cover it or whatever, was that anyone would take an interest in it. You see, even at County Highway, when we published in the beginning of November, we couldn't have guessed that the New York Times would pick it up in the way they did. I mean, they did, contra what this reporter just told us. And Christopher Rufo sort of made a connection with the story that maybe some of the money was going to terrorists back in Somalia. And he kind of refreshed outrage over the story, even though that's probably just a detail. I mean, no one knows where all the money goes.
Yeah, I mean, money's fungible, so
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Some of it, some of it went to the pornographic production of African, videos, I suppose. Some of it went to all kinds of places.
Car dealers,
rhino poaching, or whatever. Not that goes on in Somalia, I don't think. Anyway.
Yeah, and just quickly before I forget, I wanted to do this. There's a guy named Bill Glahn who worked at a place called the American Experiment, and has been on this from the beginning. The Star Tribune has been terrible on this story. The local media, they've got some of it, but there was a lot of stuff where there was obvious follow-up to do, and it's not done. And look, I haven't done it either, so
but there are, like you say, many angles. There are national political figures involved too. The governor, yes. Tim Walz, became one. Keith Ellison, the attorney general, the man in charge of the law, the mayor. These are all people who became national figures. One of the astonishing features of the last few years for me has been the primacy of Minnesota in national affairs. It's not a small state. It's not a huge state. It's out there in the middle. It's cold. It's got some sports teams that, have national attention. But for most people outside of Minnesota, there's very little reason to pay attention to Minnesota, except when the Coen brothers make a movie, making fun of the Midwestern accents. Well, or a crime drama like Fargo. Well, for it to be the center of social agitation and, rioting and protest, as it was over George Floyd,
and some pretty crazy policy ideas,
yes,
the defund the police ideas, and
it became the incubator for a lot of heavily and rather edgy progressive social policies, and for it to stay in the news with a vice presidential candidate. I mean, it might be the state of vice presidents though, because when Walter Mondale, when I was a kid, was a perennial presidential and vice presidential candidate. It was a small state, but I will say something about the culture of the state. In the 1970s, when I was a kid there, it had two aggressive newspapers, the St. Paul Pioneer Press, Minneapolis Star Tribune. It had a regional radio station, WCCO, that was a kind of like WLS in Chicago, was a universe in itself, with reporters and news shows and issues and answers. It had that was one of the shows, I think, or maybe that was national, and it had TV stations that were early in the eyewitness news mode, and for it to completely fall apart on the matter that probably concerns Minnesotans of my age most, thrift.
Yeah,
is fucking astonishing.
No, and why didn't it get why wasn't there the full colonoscopy on this story? I think it's pretty obvious there was a political subtext here. Like, a lot of people didn't want to go there while Tim Walz was on the ticket.
The one time when it matters, when our governor might end up being vice president and thus a hair's breadth away from the president of the United States. Let's go easy on him.
Yeah, and this is, this is when let's just say there's one person who was indicted and I believe convicted, and maybe our producer can check on this while we're talking, who was an employee of the I believe, well, he was in City Hall, let's put it that way. So there is there was already the outline of a fairly significant kind of kickback story that should have been looked at and wasn't.
As a general thing, I will say that the way this story has been reported as a Somali fraud is accurate and does describe the situation. And there are Somali community leaders actually on both sides of the issues. There are some that are fed up with what they see as the exploitation of their community by greedy politicians who are kind of maybe half running these rackets for the cut. But in any case, I think the way this story has been aimed at this immigrant community, which is, completely legitimate in terms of process, has obscured the extent to which it exists in a machine politics ecosystem. And good governance was everything in Minnesota. And now it's got the worst governance, it appears, that we can find pound for pound. Maybe it'll turn out that California, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, and all these other places beat it once the colonoscopy is done. But we talk a lot about the failure of the media nationally. But this is the prize exhibit of the failure of local media, which
is usually better, yes, by a lot.
And which in this region and which in this state was, until not long ago, indefatigable to some extent, and much better locally than the national media covers the nation. And that failure is the one that, as son of that region, causes despair in me.
I think people just couldn't believe it. And everybody is unfortunately caught up in this whole argument about the character of Somalis as immigrants. I think the only part of that story that is significant is that there is an additional angle to this thing that will be elusive to Americans because we don't understand it. But there is a tribal system, in Somalia that is very important to the local politics in Minneapolis, and it's it plays a part in the story that you know, for the amount of time that I spend on it, I still didn't fully understand. But it is important. Let's put it that way. It's going to turn out to be important.
When I first got some tips on this story, I looked into the pool, deep into the water, trying to see the fish, trying to see what was under it. And I thought, in some ways, if fully reported and fully understood, and I still don't know what that would mean actually, this could be the story of everything about America, because it's also the story of our foreign involvement in places like Somalia, where
Right.
we cause chaos. We drive immigration, which is guided by political interests. We form congressional districts using it. Some politicians have, and I think it's true to say in this case.
And
And
by the way, there's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like sort of bipartisan angle to that, where the Republicans and Democrats, like, only, what is it, 85% of congressional districts are contested. You know, I'm sorry, only 15%. The rest are safe districts, essentially, right?
But we forgot to mention in our roster of national figures who come from Minnesota, Ilhan Omar, one perhaps our most controversial congressperson, certainly vying for that spot. And I've got to say, her response to this all, and her part in it, if there is any.
Well, she has a part in it. But,
Yeah,
I mean, there's video of her at the Safari restaurant,
Safari
which is at the
restaurant.
epicenter.
Isn't that racist? A safari? Aren't safaris where white people come into Africa and hire black people to shoot the fucking native?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's a Somali-run place, and from what I understand, the food there is awesome. But yeah, no, it's a little weird. Or it was awesome when it was still open. But Ilhan was there. She was a regular there. And there's video of her there. And this was one of the top contractors, and she had involvement also in the bill that got this money flowing. But look, you also, what you said there was very interesting about how this could be like a map of everything. The reason this story is so interesting is because it's so you can imagine it being easily replicated everywhere. It was a massive social program where there's really no oversight mechanism whatsoever.
It's so interesting too that during the election they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats about Haitian immigrants in Ohio, when they could have served this baby up piping hot at any time.
Yeah, I mean, some of that's on the Trump campaign. Honestly, like
that's what I'm saying.
They maybe they didn't want to go there. I don't know why they didn't want to go there.
I think they were hoping to win Minnesota.
Yeah,
frankly. And you'll remember that there was a Somali community leader who endorsed Trump for president, astonishing people. Like I say, I think my sense of this, from the background information I've got through being near it, is that to some extent the Somali immigrants are wondering, are we going to find a place in America, or are we going to have to be this, are we going to have to be in this sort of defensive, offensive posture, or are our kids going to get educated, and are we going to enter the mainstream? And I think there's a little bit of conflict in the community over that, and a desire to be better served. Even at the same time, there's also a desire to get away with murder among some people, obviously.
Yeah, there are definitely people in the community who are upset about certain practices, but there are some others that aren't, right? So, but everybody's stressing that angle, which unfortunately is detracting from the corruption story, and it's allowing Tim Walz to say things like this. Can we look at SOT 10? If we've got that, is that 10? Oh no, I'm sorry. I meant, do we have the one where Waltz is talking about it being white, like a white supremacy. That one, oh, I guess we don't have that one, do we? Well, we'll look for it. Hang on a sec.
Well, Matt, it will truly be a barium scan. You know, barium being that radioactive chemical that they put into your veins to light up the scan. When, and you know it's coming from Walter, when it joins up with the Luigi story, because the Luigi story is about the assassination of the head of the biggest healthcare company in the United States, based in Minnesota. And somehow that United Healthcare, while all this other, because if there's government fraud, there's insurance fraud too. You know,
Right.
in other words, if there's private insurance or involved, and there's government Medicaid and Medicare, they're going to somehow meet each other. And I don't think that we've properly appreciated the fact that biggest healthcare company in the United States, not just an insurance company, but a multifarious healthcare company, was assassinated in strange circumstances. And coming from a state that is now revealing itself to be rife with fraud beyond belief. At some point, that company and those companies based in Minnesota that see private industry has not yet been touched by this story. It's I'm always on the ground doing little frauds that add up to huge numbers.
Yeah, it's little NGOs and little and very small private companies for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. But there may be a corporate angle.
Yep, maybe. All right, well, let's hear what Tim Waltz said. And I thought this was very revealing because for aficionados, people who are following this story, there have been two ways of looking at Waltz. Some people think that he's at best a guilty knowledge kind of figure in all this, and there are other people who think differently, that that he needs to be investigated much more seriously. But let's listen to what he had to say.
So this is what happens when your own federal government wages war against you. This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy. When you hear the Vice President of the United States talk about now white people won't have to apologize for being white. That's never happened once in my whole damn life.
Oh, come on, dude.
And this room knows what they're doing. So we're here today to say enough of this. We're here today to stand that Minnesota will protect their neighbors. So this
is Monty Python. This is a Monty Python sketch. It's to discover something like this is the most aggressive act ever, and to prosecute it, my Lord. I mean, it's almost like finding a body is worse than murder, is tantamount to murdering someone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the Norm Macdonald meme,
It totally is.
Right.
He's never seen white supremacy of this dimension and intensity. I mean, they find it everywhere, but I guess this is the worst case ever.
Yeah. I mean,
to catch people stealing who happen to be black is the essence of white supremacy.
It's not just stealing either. Like, the state got beat for, I don't know, like $9 billion. I forget what the number is. It's some outrageous number.
And certain people who are fastening on this story, like Elon Musk, who's giving it a lot of prominence on X, have said it could be as high as 18 billion. But once again, having grown up there, let me fill in the color for you. My neighbors in Taylor's Falls, Minnesota, were all dairy farmers. I was surrounded by dairy. They get up at 4 a.m. to milk cows, 3 a.m. And then that's just the first milking. It is every day of the year. And that money, the taxes paid on that money, go into, I don't know, fraudulent schemes of $1 billion sort. Iron workers on the Iron Range in Minnesota, who are some of the toughest freaking people. You think Appalachian coal country is tough? Well, the Iron Range in Minnesota is really tough. It's up there. Those people working. Wages, taxed wages are where this money comes from.
Yeah,
and these are middle class and working class and upper class people too. We can't forget the rich, I guess, in the roster of those who've been ripped off. This was public money. Like you say, it wasn't just theft. It was the expropriation of the lifeblood and energy of a whole state full of people.
And it completely turned the budgetary situation of the state upside down. It went from being in very good shape to being in very bad shape rather quickly. And not only that, the breakdown in oversight here was colossal. This wasn't like a clever bookkeeping scheme where this wasn't not Idiocracy. What's the other Mike Judge movie? Office Space, where it was fractions of a cent at a time. This was just ripping off huge chunks of public largesse over and over and over again, right under the noses of public officials who turned a blind eye repeatedly, even after being warned. This program was reinstated after it was paused.
Which one? Feeding Our Future?
Yes. And sort of by the general agreement of the Minnesota Pols, who I guess thought it was going to fly at the time, but it wasn't like this thing dropped on them and then they suddenly said, "Oh my God, this is terrible." It was dropped on them. They fought it and got the money turned back on, and then got beat. Yeah, and then the indictments finally came after that. It's preposterous. And again, it's one thing to have somebody steal something from you through a clever scheme. This wasn't that at all. This was just a total absence of oversight.
And to be stolen from in the name of sharing, hot meals with children during COVID, and in the name of helping autism, and in the name of working people needing care for their children so they can go off to their jobs cleaning Delta Airlines planes, which is one of the big Somali jobs, at the big, hub airport there in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and so on. To have your good nature abused, to have your income taxed, and to have your idealism, exploited is even worse. It's one thing to get ripped off by a stripper. Their job is to rip you off. Oh, she picked my pocket while I was getting a lap dance. It's another thing to be trying to help poor children and get everything ripped off.
Yeah. No, the widows and orphans angle to this story, and there's a great show that I love, an Australian show called Rake, about a defense lawyer who's got a substance abuse problem. Let's put it that way. But there's a moment where he has a client who basically embezzles from a cancer kids charity and takes the money and blows it on coke and hookers, right? And he's like, "Mate, look, I don't know how to tell you this, but your behavior is just totally indefensible. Like I can't, I can forgive a lot, but this one I gotta, I can't think of anything." And that's kind of what this is. This is the same kind of thing. It's like, it's just blatant stealing right out of the mouths of the neediest people. There's a partisan war over the story. There's a war over journalistic credit, which I think even some well-meaning people out there who are trying to say that, yes, this story got the attention it deserved in 2022. The problem was everybody dropped it after that, and they shouldn't have. But anyway, other stuff.
One last comment on the story. The way it's playing out and especially the way it's causing this cascade of sort of citizen journalism around fraud and in states across the country, and around especially fraud in social services, could be, I hate to use the word, a tipping point for America. Because I think in a stressed economic situation in which the middle and working classes are really hanging on, for dear life, and have been for a while, with housing costs, high and so on, the lack, the sympathy that will be given, the empathy that will be afforded these schemes is very low.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
When you look at them, you see how from almost their conception, they're perhaps corrupt enterprises, that the programs themselves are designed to be fleeced and to fleece others. And when America
and to be difficult to monitor.
And difficult to monitor. I mean, did Minnesota really finally even have the resources to monitor all these daycare centers and
No.
health transport companies and autism clinics and so on?
More than that, they didn't even have a mechanism to do so.
Right.
That's the problem. And look, there's a similar thing that goes on in like war zones, right? So, take Iraq, Afghanistan. They had to assign, special inspectors general to look at the contracts over there, because there's no person who's in charge of making sure that the military's $190 million contract to build a whatever in Iraq actually gets built. So eventually what happens is you get rumors of abuses, and then in the best case scenario, you get like an IG appointed, and they go over and they write a report. And in Afghanistan, I think the number was 15 billion, and that was a highly conservative estimate. And in Iraq, it was similar. But there's no excuse for designing programs in your own country
that you have no ability to police, and
right.
and no staff to police. Matt, the nightmare scenario is this: if I want to be like worst case scenario novelist Walter Kern, and it has happened in the past in similar situations, the corruption basically will go on, but a whole new police action and a whole new staff of investigators and set of infringements will come about in order to somehow investigate it and discipline it, which won't work. So we'll have a whole nother layer. Fraud is the first layer. Policing fraud ineffectively is the next layer. And somehow everybody else who's not doing it will have their freedom or their finances or their taxes or God knows what, investigated at a higher level. They'll put in new mechanisms of control, which will just add, as I say, a capstone to the thing without curing it.
Walter, that is a great point. And I'm often accused of changing my politics over the years. I think for the most part, I haven't. One area, though, where I had a kind of road to Damascus moment was when I was covering the Eric Garner story, where I was researching that book. And I had covered lots of welfare fraud cases and how easy they are to generate compared to corporate fraud cases and all that. Mm-hmm. But one of the problems that appears with the welfare system is that in response to complaints about abuses of the welfare system and people, for instance, signing up for TANF or whatever the program was at the time, when actually they had a job or a boyfriend or whatever it was, typically what happens is like the Republicans will get hold of that, and then as you say, another bureaucracy will get created, and it will just be a whole bunch of inspectors who go around and do things like check the underwear drawers of women who are, getting welfare, and literally like sniffing bed sheets to make sure they don't have somebody cohabiting with them. They have tip lines, snitch lines. They have a whole system of incentives to get people to rat out their neighbors if they're on welfare. So you're absolutely right. Like you have a bad social program, and then it's compounded by a bad surveillance system.
Yes.
And
new licensing, and new this and new that. There's a little fable from Montana here. I knew of a town in Montana that had a police force, and they needed a new jail. The problem was there was no crime. And so they started aggressively enforcing all these ordinances and so on to create the idea that there was a crime wave. And there was, in a sense. They were revealing crime, I guess, that had been there and gone unprosecuted. And then they got the new jail. And, then they needed to fill the new jail. Otherwise, it would look like they built it for nothing. And these things, ratchet up by this devilish logic. People have a name for it, the problem solution dialectic, but what tells me that maybe at the federal level, even there's going to be new scrutiny of the law abiding and a new bonanza,
it'll just end up being a new, what's the word they call it with military contract, a new.
Can we just blame the people who stole the money already?
Yeah, I want to address this.
Nobody has made an excuse for anybody. First,
no,
I don't know what you're talking about.
The fucking money. We're not. It's not like we're not upset about that.
But the people who stole the money, who are those people? We're still finding out. Because it just wasn't Mr. Somalian restaurateur, I promise you. And it wasn't just Mr. Somalian daycare owner. It involves all kinds of layers. As we said, we framed this as a story about an immigrant community, but also the machine politics of the state. And we have been talking about the big boys too. You see, in film noir, you look at the little street criminals, but you always find out it goes up to City Hall. Okay?
Exactly. And as we said, there is already one conviction that involves somebody who worked in City Hall for the mayor's office. But beyond that, just use your heads, folks. Are the DOJ, or I'm saying not the DOJ, the prosecutors called like the owner, one of the owners of one of the restaurants, the mastermind of this whole scheme. Now, ask yourself if that's really what you think is going on.
The mastermind who opened the Safari restaurant.
Right.
Sounds like a digression. It's not. I had a friend once who had an amazing series of jobs, quirky jobs over the year. And one of his jobs was he worked in disaster catering, which is a term I love. There was in Missoula, Montana, a company that caters to forest fires and hurricanes. In other words, they fly out and they serve the meals to the emergency workers who are fighting a forest fire or cleaning up after a hurricane. And I said, that's an interesting job. Sounds gritty. And he said, no, it's one of the greatest jobs ever. Like, you get to eat the food because most of the people don't even show up for dinner when they're fighting a forest fire, but every dinner that was made gets billed, and it gets billed forever. He says, so I'm getting all the food, and filling up my car with the best, and it's like, we have, prime rib and stuff. Nobody eats it, and they charge triple what a restaurant would. It's one of the funnest experiences ever to be disaster caterers,
That's so true. I mean, again, I was in Iraq. I remember going into the cafeteria with some of the guys, I was embedded with, and they were showing me around the first day, and there was like a Cinnabon in there, and like Baskin Robbins ice cream and everything, and I'm like, wow, like I kind of had a different idea of what war would be like. And
exactly. And war was the place that this used to happen. But now
right,
we've got the war at home, these social
boondoggle,
wars. And so we've militarized the social welfare programs in the United States. So now you don't have to go to Iraq to see boondoggles anymore. They're right here at home on a vast and somewhat warlike scale.
yeah, and to make another confession, like I was in Iraq and I saw like 9 things where I was like, man, that seems like a little bit extravagant. And not until like maybe a year later did I put it together. Like, you find out that every time a person walked into the cafeteria, like they billed the taxpayer $57 or something like that. And meanwhile, like the army used to make food, like shitty food maybe, but
Right.
much cheaper. Right.
What happened to dehydrated tuna casserole in an
Right.
MRE?
Right.
But Matt, not that correlation is causation, but it's my job to make somewhat illogical, but otherwise enriched and evocative comparisons. It may be that having spent decades at war in just the way you're describing, in these wars that ultimately profit the contractors hugely, and that don't seem to get decided in any military way for a long time.
Oh,
in these boondoggle wars, maybe it's possible that ethic has corrupted.
There's
America.
no question there is a tail wagging the dog thing that happens with contracting after a while, and it's
maybe the Somalis learned this in Somalia when we showed up. I mean, not that they didn't learn it already in their own ways, but maybe they saw some of this potential in the way. I have a friend who I'm not going to name him. Well, his name is Matthew Eck. He's a novelist who I taught at the University of Montana. He wrote a book called The Farther Shore about being a U.S. Marine in Somalia, in Mogadishu. It's a Tim O'Brien-like book. It's a novel. It's a fictional account of his experience. But he describes to me what it was like to be a U.S. Marine in Somalia. And then he described to me what it was like. If you remember, we invaded Haiti. Do you remember when we invaded Haiti? He was part of the invasion.
Wow.
I'll never forget. The invasion consisted of them landing at an airport that we'd long controlled with a naval armada that was unopposed, with huge crowds of people cheering. And according to him, women flashing their breasts. Like it was the most, violent invasion in history, maybe.
Right.
But in both cases, there were these boondoggles. There was a lot of sitting around the base camp watching TV, and I gotta say, maybe by making this the way that we do war around the world, we've shown others and ourselves a new way to be at home.
Totally. Where the contracting drives the mission as opposed to the other way. So
yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we're of like mind on this, but we see how this is being partisanized, but it's a real story. People who think it isn't are crazy. All right. There was a big journalism controversy. We should talk about it because people will give us a hard time if we don't. So let's go to SOT4. This is MS Now talking about Bari Weiss and 60 Minutes. Which is a more complicated story than I think people think, but let's hear it.
Controversy has once again engulfed CBS News and 60 Minutes, and this evening it is spilling out into public view. The network's flagship program was supposed to air a segment last night focused on Venezuelan men deported by the administration to El Salvador's prison, but it was abruptly pulled 3 hours before air after Bari Weiss, CBS's new editor-in-chief, requested multiple changes. The decision sparked an internal uproar, and Sharon Alfonsi, the veteran correspondent behind the report, called it, quote, political. Alfonsi also said the report was screened 5 times and cleared by both CBS attorneys and standards. Weiss, however, defended the decision, saying in a statement, quote, I held a 60-minute story because it wasn't ready, and it did not advance the ball. Our viewers come first, not the listing schedule or anything else. That is my North Star. and I hope it's yours too.
Okay. All right. So
why did she pull the story, according to her and according to others?
Well, she claims she pulled the story because look, let me back up. In the old days, when 60 Minutes was 60 Minutes, you would not have a big expose about corruption by an administration and not have a comment from the administration. And that's not because presidents were nicer to the media back in the day. It's because, like, once upon a time, Mike Wallace and Morley Safer could say, "We're 60 Minutes. You don't get this no comment us." And basically, and they wouldn't take no for an answer either. Like, in other words, it would be very bad practice. It would be considered very bad practice not to get the perspective of the administration. Now, in this case, the reporter Sharon Alfonsi, who is one we've talked about before, Walter, we didn't use her name, but she was the person who did that infamous 60 Minutes piece about censorship in Berlin. And we remember one of the remarkable features of that story is that it had no counter voices in it. There were no free speech advocates.
It was all about the glory of getting your door knocked at 6 a.m. in the morning and being raided simultaneously across Germany for, aberrant expression. And she was as enthusiastic about it as you could be.
Yeah, and they had that creepy German person saying, democracy must have guardrails, all that stuff. And there's no other side. So what happened? Like, apparently they did reach out to the DHS and I think another agency for comment, and didn't get a response. So they decided to run the story as is. Now, it is a very bad look, I think, for the head of a broadcaster to pull a story just before it's about to go to air, especially after you've already run the promos, right? A lot of people are running with this theory that there was a phone call made, but that hasn't been established. A
specific phone call, or just a general theory that there must have been?
That there must have been, right? But there's nothing to back that up. So at this point, however, the optics are that that CBS balked at a story critical of the Trump administration and pulled it at the last minute. Whereas I think what would it wouldn't be a story if this had simply happened before the promos went out, right?
Well, that made it obvious.
Exactly.
This might have been, this might have been a media story, but not a public and national story had it not been obvious that something had taken place and that it took place at the last minute. I guess she outlined in a memo her reasoning, but I'll say this. CBS News is experiencing what is essentially a hostile takeover editorially by Barry Weiss, someone who I've worked with and wouldn't strike me as, they're not an ideologue. I wouldn't call him a pro-Trumper. I wouldn't call them, a populist or whatever, but they're not what was there before. I guess she's somewhat to the right of what was there before.
I think she's anti-woke. I think she has definite opinions on Israel that run counter to certain
right. But they're acting as though Mussolini came into welfare state Britain and tried to wrest away the National Health Service or something in a day. They're acting as though this has the little tyrant has come in and I've never seen an editorial change or of personnel become a national story like this ever. I mean, each New York Times editor is a big story, but only to the extent that they have new promise and new focus. But this was something like a change of the guard, but it's been portrayed as, I don't know, a phenomenon never seen before. And I like I like the way that it's educating America about how newsrooms work and how standards in journalism work, even if to some they were violated. I want to see the barium enema or the colonoscopy of the press, because people need to see how it works, and maybe even if you're mad about it, this will show you that there are tensions within newsrooms, there are tensions within establishments like this, and we'll see how it all works out. But the Bari Weiss melodrama at CBS, which they've made a bigger story than these usually are, these changes, executive positions, is, I think, causing people to start thinking about how it's made, how the sausage is made.
Yeah, no, and there's a couple of things here that are deeply annoying. One is the implication. Well, let's start with the basics. There's a lot of there are a lot of people who work at media companies who are backdooring their bosses and getting away with it in ways that I wouldn't have expected to.
Dude, I remember at GQ magazine, the first time when the smartphone kind of, was finally coming into popular use, I was in a room where people were texting during an editorial meeting. And I thought, who is selling us out? Who is, on the line with a hostile person or a gossip columnist, or maybe just a friend, or maybe even a competitor? That's something you've got to deal with every moment now in a newsroom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there was an understanding previously that if you had an issue with your bosses, either because, let's just take an example of something that happens commonly in journalism that creates tension between them and management. A mistake is added to the story in the production process, right? That's not the bylined person's fault, right? But it's esprit de corps. It's like pro sports. The quarterback stands before the microphone and you take the hit. Like that's part of the job.
Mm-hmm.
They save your ass in fact checking all the time. And when they screw up and the story's out there and it's got your name on it, you've got to take the hit, right? And that wasn't I wouldn't say that was like an ethical thing, but it was much more about like an esprit de corps concept that we can't work together. We can't do the news together unless we trust each other, right? And the idea that like I have a pretty good idea that if I had ratted to media reporters about things that went on in offices where I worked, that I'd be gone and then I wouldn't be hired again, right? And I guess we're just in this new era where people talk to it used to be, if you had a real problem, you got to resign, then you talk, right?
Right.
But not before then. So I think that's weird. The other thing is the notion, like everybody's assuming, first of all, that there is interference from above, or that there was a phone call made. And first of all, they haven't demonstrated that. Secondly, there's a long tradition of this kind of being openly done and nobody giving a shit about it. Like Michael Hayden, when he was the head of the CIA, just bragged openly about browbeating New York Times editors into not running stories. And that was kind of shrugged off, that stuff. So
WikiLeaks was full of evidence of all sorts of, chumminess, even collusion between the press and, politicians. How can I put it? A phone call was made would be the least shocking thing in the history of, Washington politics. There were people in the Biden administration were proud of making those phone calls, and would acknowledge openly that they got stories killed or whatever. Getting stories killed and getting stories planted is something that politicians do because it's in their interest. And frankly, they should do, because journalists are supposed to be the defense against that. Everybody has to play their role. And if they made a phone call, so they make a phone call about everything. It's whether the phone call, how it was treated on the news side, but
yeah, on the news side, you normally wouldn't even pick up the phone unless it was some kind of process complaint. Like, they didn't ask us for comment. Can we comment?
Right.
Like, in that case, the editor usually would pick up the phone. I think, just to balance out the whole picture here, I do think Bari has shown that she, sometimes the optics, she doesn't have a great grasp of how things are going to play out, right? And obviously, she's never run a network before. She's still got a pretty big role at the Free Press, which is, I think, odd.
Matt, do you even know who the head of NBC News is? Name them.
No, I don't.
Do you know who the name of head of ABC News is?
I don't anymore. Like, and I used to know. We used to know who the head of, CNN was, right? Who was the guy in the early Trump era? Jeff, whatever his name was.
That's because it's Bari Weiss and the rest.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
They don't even need names because the product is so similar, and now, so how I could put it, supplicating to power we just had a presidency that lasted years, in which they killed constantly the story that the guy is fucking senile.
Oh, I know.
So there's Bari Weiss and the morality that's being, and the ethics that are being, applied in her case, and the rest. And
yeah. And she sent a memo. I think, do we have that? Do we have Bari's memo? But the memo, I think, is generally right. Another, what does it say? Hang on a second. We do not present the administration's argument for why it sent 250 Venezuelans to CICOT.
Well, that's important in this story because,
right, yeah, exactly.
Because without their comment, the presumption will be they sent them there to get tortured.
Well, right, yes,
or they sent them there to be abused.
Yes, and you know what? Who knows? It might be true, but again, the old 60 Minutes, and I spent a lot of my childhood in the CBS building where. Not my childhood, my teen years, where that show was produced. They would have wanted this, somebody like Stephen Miller on camera. They would have wanted that person's side, and maybe not even to be flattering or to platform him, right? Like in other words, they would have wanted that interview to do their thing and give a hardcore interview, right? Because the story is it just packs a bigger wallop when you've got all of it in there. And there is a thing that has happened with reporting in the last couple of, I don't know, maybe the last 5-10 years, where everybody knows that we're a one-sided organization, so we're going to give lip service to asking for comment, and we're not really going to try to get it. And that's a bad practice, I think.
Matt, in your new incarnation as a person who's campaigning to lose all his friends and be assailed by all sides, even sides that didn't exist before, you've pointed out things like calling Jeffrey Epstein a convicted sex trafficker is actually inaccurate because he was never convicted of it. Now he's dead, so he will never be convicted of it.
Right.
Now, making points like that causes responses like, why do you only defend Epstein? Why are you pro-pedophilia? Why are you this? Well, the application of just recently universal journalism standards is now suddenly controversial. We went from the New York Times saying we're going to start to bend the rules here because we're in an extraordinary situation where we have to, oppose Trump, years ago when they did, was it Jim Rutenberg? I forget who.
Yeah, it was Rutenberg. Yeah,
Rutenberg did the story, announcing the Times' new editorial policy. But now we're on the defensive, asking for other side comment, and proper identification of people like Jeffrey Epstein in a legal sense.
People they lose their minds over the mere suggestion of it, which is.
So now you're not just bending the objective and sort of admitting to some activist journalism. You're now through the looking glass, where the old form is practically criminal.
Well, right, and as we've talked about before, there's a huge other angle to this, which is that if you leave stuff that's not right in these big authoritative news organizations, then they become part of the AI, sort of database of information, and errors sort of constantly repeat themselves, and it gets magnified everywhere.
And particularly if they appear in these credentialed, trusted sources.
Exactly.
And so a story on 60 Minutes, a story in the New York Times now goes to the head of the line for AI digestion. And, it becomes the corn in the poop, the visible part of it. And once it's amalgamated with everything else, convicted sex trafficker is okay. Or, we have to be very careful now, because these legacy media institutions that are formerly popular institutions, but may have limited and fewer readers and viewers than ever before, have an outsized prestige in the AI. And we should, in other words, mistakes used to be corrected and correctable, but now once they get out into the wild of Grok and OpenAI and so on, they perpetuate themselves forever. I don't know quite how you rid yourself of them.
Yeah, they just get they remain in perpetuity, and even because there's so much repetition, somebody who tries to from the outside make a correction will find themselves sort of sublimated and de-amplified and all that stuff. In a smaller point, like in a similar vein, like the Washington Post did a story this week about a transgender athlete, and I have to say, I'm a little tired of these stories about the travails of the transgender athlete and all the hard times they had to go through as they were kicking everybody's ass. But anyway, there is a little.
Well, because Matt, it's not just transgender athlete. You're talking specifically male to female transgender. right?
Right. So
They're the ones who kick ass.
yeah. So there's a scene in here where it's kind of going in the head of the athlete, right? In the post story, and I just want to read this.
Another meditative profile photo, by the way. You know.
Oh, I know. It's like it's the same thing. Standing, right? Like
why are they next to a lake? By the way,
right? Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Is that a narcissist thing? I don't know. Probably not. Right?
Not a narcissist, because they're actually looking at their knee rather than into the water at their reflection.
Maybe it was a different and lesser known myth. But anyway, there's a passage in there where it says, "But sports were never fair," Veronica thought as she rode a school bus.
Sports were never fair?
But sports were never fair.
That's something the Washington Post wants to say, not just Veronica. You know, the art of selective quoting. There you go, Matt. There's your headline forever and ever about anything having to do with they were never fair. Pretty soon they will be sports were never honest either. We'll have a cheating scandal involving someone, you know, of a special profile, but we've got to realize sports were never honest. They were always fixed. Didn't you know
they
that?
were always fixed. They, Aroldis Chapman he wasn't throwing 102 miles an hour. That was just, it was scripted that one person would get a hit against Jacob deGrom and the rest of the guys would whiff. Like, come on, like really? But anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
As she rode a school bus to a track across town. You're right. It gets into her thoughts.
Yeah. So then it says, but sports were never fair, Veronica thought as she rode a school bus to a track across town. The swimmer Michael Phelps had an unusually long wingspan, and Brittany Griner towered over the WNBA. Now, Walter, Jesse Single tweeted this out.
Dude, this challenges the very idea of being better at something.
I know.
Dude, having strong neck for a center in football, they have unusually strong necks. Aren't running backs unusually fast with, fast twitch muscles and so on? Like, in other words, since everyone isn't a robot, absolutely equal in talent, then what are sports?
I mean, this argument is so dumb. Like,
it undermines the notion of sports because some people are better at them, usually as a result of things that are physical.
Sports aren't fair. Michael Jordan can just jump over everybody. So why not? Even the odds with hormones or whatever the fuck. Are you crazy? Like, how crazy do you have to be to think like?
But this could have been, dude. But how upside down? People talk. Sometimes they use the term humiliation ritual. They talk about these changes in sentiment and these changes in position being a humiliation ritual of the population. Because once we remember one rule, they come and fucking turn it upside down. And it's and the diehard conspiracy theorists will say this is a demoralization campaign against the human being and the human mind. Weren't we just going through doping scandals in which using, steroids and so on was, but now it's like, what? Yeah, you can't use testosterone?
I mean, Barry Bonds was the biggest villain in America because
Jose Canseco, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the guy was already a great baseball player. He just decided he wanted to be a little bit greater.
But dude, sports were never fair,
but
drugs are part of sports, and part of the unfairness is people using drugs. What?
So the article is ridiculous, and you're absolutely right to point that out. Like, my jaw dropped when I read that paragraph. I thought, but it's the quote. It's the
some hired personal trainers. We'll never have an Olympics again because I've heard that there are special coaches, and I've heard that gymnasts go to special camps sometimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can't have that. Everybody has to have equal training and everything. Like, what? But Walter, when you read that, do you
expensive shoes? Here's the worst line, because I've not seen this yet, Matt, and my jaw is just dropping over. Others had the kind of expensive shoes that can help propel runners ahead of their competition. Some had tennis rackets that make the ball, fly off.
I mean,
her own shoes were donated in 2 sizes too small. Wow. So really, if you look at all things and all the contributing factors here, she was the underdog.
Yeah,
even though sports aren't fair anyway.
Yeah, she was that's the point of this whole thing, is that sports aren't fair. She was the underdog, and so this whole idea of competing, under a different sex is whatever. That idea is nuts.
Remember when we used to hate the Russians because sometimes it seemed like their female athletes might be dudes, or at least have taken drugs that made them somewhat like dudes? Now it's like, come on.
Remember the movie Top Secret when they were playing the East German national anthem and the women's powerlifting team was presenting the medals, and it was all these dudes with that was a joke in America not long ago. But I'm sorry, this is a minor esoteric point, but when you read that, when you read Veronica Thought, but sports were never fair, Veronica Thought, as she rode a school bus. Michael Phelps has long arms, and Brittany Griner towered over the WNBA. Do you think that must be a quote, or do you think that's something the writer
Matt? We could go on about this paragraph just as maybe Somali fraud in Minnesota, lights up the entire system. This kind of lights up the entire system too. First of all, substitute for the word sports, life, or society, because they're talking about an argument almost for communist egalitarianism, but they're putting it in the frame of sports. In other words, this is the disguised argument for equity in everything, and in the one area where non-equity is a goddamn point, because somebody has to win.
Exactly. Yes.
And somebody has to be better, and the search for that better person is what the damn thing is about. And the spectacle and the miracle of someone, somehow between their natural gifts and their training, all races should end in ties.
Yeah. Right. Well, we'll have the
even if that means some people waiting right before the finish line, because the person with the worst shoes should probably always be allowed an extra 10 yards in any sprint or something. Wow. This undermines the whole idea of sports, but it also undermines the whole idea of capitalism, the competition between people, families, and individuals. I mean, this is pretty much the whole ball game right here, Matt. We should all just be melted down into an AI, except certain people should win anyway, but based not on whether they're good or not.
Yeah, it's just a crazy story. And now,
but you're right. But you're right. They smuggled all their editorial positions into the thoughts of this person on a school bus.
Well, right. And do we know if that person actually thought that? Right? See, that's the thing.
It's a limbo between quotation and editorial,
not long ago, I hate to be so all back in the day about this, but you couldn't do this unless it was absolutely clear that the person gave you permission to do that.
But even if they did, Matt.
Yes, even if they did, it's weird.
It's a fabrication, because one of the reasons we preserve a distinction between fiction and nonfiction. Soon we'll have sentences in the Washington Post, but journalism was always made up. I mean, journalism was always fictional to some extent. But one of the reasons we preserve that distinction is there's some things that you can't know as an outsider. And journalism in general doesn't report on them. It only reports on what people say, not what they think, unless they say that they thought it.
Exactly.
It doesn't divine the intent of God. or the spirits. We don't usually do that in journalism, but pretty soon they'll do it. I mean, and one day God looked down on Brittany and said, it's time you win a race. And she heard his voice.
And it's just weird to see like talking points inserted.
If she thought all that, then why didn't she say it?
Yeah, why isn't that a quote, right? Like, yeah, it's just odd. But I bring that up because it's part of this whole thing that's happening with these news stories where, like, you don't really know what you're looking at anymore, right? So, yes,
I want to see the notebook that includes her talking about special shoes being an example of unfairness in sports. I kind of doubt that I doubt that the items listed in that stream of consciousness exist in a reporter's notebook from an actual interview. I doubt
it might come from another interview. That's another thing. Like, well, we can't speculate on that, I guess. But
that's why it sucks, because we don't know. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just frustrating because, like, it's all the crazy attributions that we deal with, the gazillion people familiar with the matter, the story of Marjorie Taylor Greene is like a nightmare of trying to figure out the sourcing there. It's like I could have gotten something if I had asked for it, and then I told Trump that if I had that, could I release it? And this is what he told me, and I'm not telling you. So it's like a hypothetical based on hearsay, based on it's not like I don't believe her story. It's just that you're dealing with so many different layers of not knowing what exactly the deal is with this story. That
if you did this, if you used these techniques in a contentious article where somebody might sue you, you'd be in trouble. But you can use them when you're trying to polish somebody. These are puff piece techniques, right? Because you couldn't attribute thoughts to somebody who might sue you. You couldn't have them, in other words, it had to come out of the closeness of the reporter with the subject and their affection for each other. Because I can't attribute thoughts to someone that are pejorative, and prejudicial. I can't say, as Matt Taibbi walked out that day, he looked across at this X person and thought, people of that race suck. You sue the shit out of them, right, and you'd win because they obviously can't go in your head. But when you're polishing somebody, when you're, putting them forward as a hero, they're willing to let you do this.
Yeah, it's right. It's a hagiographic kind of a thing, right? So people don't mind, but the problem is that the technique gets accepted, and down the line, we're not going to know whether something is a quote or whether something actually happened, or it's just that's frustrating.
Well, wait until it is used negatively, though. And somebody writes a profile of Walter Kern and says, as he walked down the street, the beautiful, well-formed derriere of the woman ahead, fixated his attention. He started fantasizing about that person. Though married, by the time he got around the corner, he thought everybody cheats. Infidelity is part of the Darwinian nature of things. Well, and let's say I'm an enemy of the powers that be, or that paper, or whatever. And would you allow them to be negative about somebody in this fashion? Well, then you shouldn't allow them to be positive about somebody in this fashion.
Yeah.
Let's see your quotes, or at least report not some vaporous on a school bus one day. What day?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's another thing, right? It should be a little more specific. we have to assume it's a quote, but it's just written in a way that makes you not know.
We have to assume, but I also get the suspicion we're wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Once I know we're not talking about the novel, but about Train Dreams. I'm sorry. But there's one that I think we should get in because it's about people we've talked about on the show. It's a big news story. So on before Christmas, Marco Rubio tweeted that he was announcing sanctions against, I think it was 5 people that he considered what did he say? For far too long, ideologues in Europe have led organized efforts to coerce American platforms to punish American viewpoints. They oppose the Trump administration. These egregious acts of extraterritorial censorship. Today, the State Department will take steps to bar leading figures of the global censorship industrial complex from entering the United States. And one of those people turned out to be Imran Ahmed from the Center for Countering Digital Hate. And we've reported on him extensively at Racket for a number of reasons. He was a big character. Well, he was, the CCDH was a character in the Twitter files as well. I think SOT1 is actually Omred talking, but there are some other people as well, including Thierry Breton. Walter, remember we talked about him when he basically threatened Romania, he threatened Germany, basically, like, we did it in Romania, we can do it to you too, like about the election results. That's that same character. The French, he was sort of the French censor in chief for a little while and part of the EU complex. He's been barred. The woman we were talking about from Hate Aid, who was in that story by Sharon Alfonsi, the one whose accent I was picking on, she's in here. So it's all folks that we've discussed before, and this use of the term censorship industrial complexes, it's a little freaky for me.
Schellenberger.
Yeah, because I remember I was there when Michael thought up that term. I remember that. I can't say that this is what I had in mind. Like I wouldn't have wanted the United States to bar these visas for these folks, and there's a.
But at the same time, let's remember one of the things that they're partly responsible over in Europe is massive fines against American companies.
Of course, yes.
And so, the banishment or the lack of, ingress to the United States is Trump's way of, the Trump administration's way of countering vast billion-dollar judgments based on these people's work against American companies. I mean, something's got to give, right? I mean, whether these stand or not, these banishments or these travel restrictions, they call attention to a problem that I don't know that people properly understand, which is that the European Union and these bureaucrats are not just censoring, but they're hauling away billions of dollars.
Yeah, and we did a story with Paul Thacker at the Disinformation Chronicle. We got Paul got hold of some documents, internal documents from CCDH with their plans from last summer. They had like minutes for the American,
right,
and
get Elon Musk.
Yeah, it was Kill Musk's Twitter was on the program, and Thierry Breton, again, that's a person who obviously attracted the attention of the administration because of the sort of finger wagging idea that the EU will change, will use the Digital Services Act to influence election results or to force revotes if we need to. The Hate Aid group is a group that is, our friends at LiberNet. That's Andrew Lowenthal, right? They've done a lot of work on these German organizations that chronicle what they consider hate speech, right? And then there's a variety of reasons how that's all suppressed over there.
Well, unfortunately, Europe doesn't have any social media companies or any platforms of worldwide or even, transatlantic influence that we can take billions of dollars from. There's no tit for tat in this because they don't make the fucking products well enough that they appeal to anyone. And so they are sitting there putting, all sorts of restrictions and levying all these fines against American industry. But we can't respond in kind because they don't make the product. And so I guess this is maybe a symbolic attempt to draw attention to it. I mean, I don't really think finally it matters whether these people come to the United States or not. Will their evil plans be forwarded or, encouraged, or if they're able to meet here in the United States rather than on Zoom? I don't think it matters. But I think it's an attempt to draw attention to what's going on.
Look, it's a serious international problem when you have these international platforms and then individual countries, or in the case of the EU, conglomerations of countries get together and they decide to impose very severe penalties, or even in the cases of some friends of ours, right, like arrests, detention.
We have entered a world where I know Americans who are afraid of having their words transported to Europe, and then being sued in some weird international fashion that's kind of new.
Right. And it places an enormous amount of pressure on the platforms to not only de-amplify or remove the content abroad, even if it may not, violate their terms of service, which creates a very weird environment if you do that, right? If you have differing standards. But then also, they may end up just taking it off entirely, right, to comply. Like that's clear. I think that's clearly the intent of some of these laws, is to try to pressure.
That's the intent of all laws, just about, is to make compliance so expensive that, to make non-compliance so expensive that you get compliance anyway. But I gotta say, the size of the fines means they like the money too, because they spend it. They don't put it in a trust account. They use it, and the lack of how can I put it? They act so unselfish. They act as though they're, behaving as they do because of the woeful nature and the woeful consequences of hate speech and all these other things. But they like the money too. Sort of like the local cops, speeding kills, and we like the tickets.
Well, before we wrap up, let's hear what Imran. We have some video of Imran Ahmed actually responding to this.
And they're always so smiling, and they're so engaging.
I know this guy would eat your heart, without blinking. This dude. But anyway, go ahead. Let's hear what he had to say.
Rubio called you and these other individuals foreign censors. What do you make of that accusation?
Well, thank you. I mean, it's terribly confusing. The work that the center does, looking into things as diverse as the spread of online hatred against Jews, anti-Semitism on social media platforms, which we worked on with the first Trump administration in 2020. We're a non-profit, and we can't therefore be censoring things, which is, of course, something that the government does.
Dude,
I
they're
mean,
they're a
you seem to be arguing
charity.
that your free speech rights are being violated, which is precisely what the administration argues you are doing. Do you have a sense as to why your organization and why you in particular were targeted?
Racism, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues that we've had is that we take on, of course, some of the biggest corporations in America, companies like X, Elon Musk, Meta, and others, and ChatGPT, so OpenAI, and these companies which typically aren't able to be held accountable properly, whether that is through the courts because of the way that US law is structured, that they are the only companies in America whose products really aren't subject to any liability if they cause harm to people.
Okay.
Even
All
when
right.
they
I can't take it anymore. All
We
right.
saved your ass in the war. I want to be like the oldest guy in the world and say, you know, you'd be living under fucking Hitler, you know, if it weren't for U.S. corporations.
In WW2.
Yeah, but like that whole roster of companies, as I said, does not have any equivalent. You have corporations too. It's just that they can't compete with ours, dude. You know, sorry.
And what the fuck is that? That was PBS, okay? That's American public news, okay?
The dude's baffled. See, I've had arguments in person with the likes of this guy. Okay, I won't name them and go through our bête noire and our list of adversaries.
I think we know who we're both talking about.
Yeah. And this is the script. Here's the script. Oh my God, we help people. You know,
we're just researchers.
We're trying to stop anti-Semitism. We're a charity. We hardly have any money. We get a little money from the government, you know, but we're baffled by what's going on here. Why should our efforts to defend the nearly defenseless and push back against power, you know, speak truth to corporate power, why should they be at all opposed by any sane person? You know,
I don't know. Look, the CCDH is we saw them in the Twitter files. Like they were involved in a variety of issues. They were very heavily involved with going after people they considered to be anti-vaxxers, and in many cases they were not. They were wrong about a lot of things. You know, the whole thing about you know, and this is an organization that also has, you know, even though he describes himself as a nonprofit, it's very explicitly tied to the Labor Party. Like it's not government, but it's almost government, you know.
It's very tied to the Labor Party that sent people over into our last presidential election to work for the Democratic campaign, right? I mean, openly. This is a new form of combat, maybe a new form of extortion. And American thoughts, if they're going to, and American companies, if they're going to exist in this Europe where the sensibilities obviously are much higher and more refined than ours, and where the concern about hate is obviously much, you know, more profound, are going to have to what? Pay up? Well, they paid up. They seem to want influence over our society. I don't think there's any argument that this guy is saying you Americans are putting up with a dangerous corporate and speech structure that we're going to reform because you can't. And we're not just going to reform it for ourselves, but we're going to reach into your world and try to reform it for you because apparently you're not able to do it yourself. That's kind of what he was saying between the lines. He was saying, you know, we Europeans still have the grit to stand up to Meta. You all apparently have been completely rolled over. That scares me.
It should, and this is the outline of a conflict and a theme that I'm sure we're going to talk about again because it's probably going to be the major issue in the next 10 years or so. Is this schism in the Western world between the kind of Wilsonian, maybe European conception of managed democracy, like democracy ruled by experts, right?
Dude, after birthing communism, Nazism, all kinds of fascism and other, absolute horrors of modern politics, they're now in the lecturing us mode.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. After it was our reserve might that came over and sorted things out for them. And I can barely take it as a person.
I know. When the more you think about it, the angrier you should get. Like the lack of for PBS to not see the angle of we need to stand up for American companies that are being censored, right? And that the American government has a role there, like an important one, but they don't see that, and they don't see this growing divide where there's a way of looking at things that unfortunately is only really finding representation now in places like the American government and some other populist movements around the world, where we're still committed to this idea of individual liberty, democratic rule, even when it's stupid.
Blah, blah, blah. All an excuse for hate. True story. I wrote it in Harper's in 2016. I'm sitting watching Trump's acceptance speech at the Republican convention in Cleveland. I'm sitting next to a German film crew. I don't know if they were state or private media. As Trump comes up, he turns to me and says, "Someday we may have to invade you to save you from fascism." And I looked at him and I said, "That's our problem."
Yeah. Yeah. I'm shaking in my boot. I'm quaking in my boots, dude. Like, are you kidding me?
But it's like, in other words, this is like we lent money to somebody who then, who was absolutely poor and in the ditch. And then as soon as they got a job and a nice car, started lecturing us, about how, they have a messianic streak, but it's combined with a self-interested streak because they can't build these companies so they can tax them and they can fine them when they get done taxing them.
And Walter, I think it's even worse than that. I would argue that because we've subsidized their defense for so long, that we've allowed them to put money into the creation of these bureaucracies. And so we've actually accelerated this process.
But we've also allowed domestic political interests to use them as cutouts.
Right. Yes, that's true too. Absolutely. There's no question about that. That's happening now. I mean, it's not to say that the Trump administration has great instincts on speech. And again, I don't like this thing that Rubio is doing in a vacuum. 5 people isn't a big number and it's stupid, right? I don't think it's a good response, but there's a real problem here with we can't allow the EU to be making decisions about what is and is not what they call illegal content. Like, we don't have that. We have things that we don't that are actionable in this country, but we would never call something illegal content, right? Like, that doesn't really work. Anyway,
we're going to let the authors of totalitarianism, basically Europeans, now lecture us on democracy after we saved them from the ashes of their fight, their internecine sectarian ideological wars, one of which they still want to fight, which is over there in Ukraine, Russia. But I am most scared by the, how can I put it, the piety, because they're expressing a new philosophy of thought and expression that I don't think have fully reckoned with yet.
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, I don't want to go on too long about this, but you're go on, Walter. This is
you pick up on it. Go ahead.
Well, no, I like it's this idea. It's to me, it's the full realization of the concept of democracy is imperfect. it doesn't work in advanced technological societies. So we must have this new hybrid system that's essentially a bureaucratic form of government. There are arguments going on the right about this now too, that we should endorse a sort of one party type of solution, but
that speech should be judged for its effect, and
right,
or possible effect, its potential effect, and punishment should be collective. In other words, we don't just take issue with individual outbursts or expressions of ideas. We lay down laws that will put up guardrails, as you say, that will filter and prevent at the source even the possibility of these things being said. It's like pre-crime, it's pre-thought crime, pre-speech crime. We're gonna assume that everyone who talks about certain subjects in certain ways is, against the state, against society, against a certain race or a certain gender, and we'll cut it off at the root. I don't know how Europe thinks it's going to go much further down the road of intellectual or social progress using these ideas. I mean, one of the reasons they don't have an X, one of the reasons they don't have a Meta, is because they're like this.
Well, right. They don't have an instinct for what makes communication cool.
Right. For fun. And this is why you still have Eurovision Song Contest, at which every country gets to give its bad idea of what rock and roll is, or popular music. And we wonder at how could they get it wrong, like every year, fucking year. In every country, you find a new bad way to make pop music. Well, they are, I think, at the end of their development, philosophically, in some ways. We might be an anarchic, chaotic, ugly, and sometimes bruising society, but it's open AI comes from Washington State, and all these things come from California, our former capital of free expression, and let it all hang out. England and Germany and France have nothing to offer the human spirit anymore, except secular church ladyism.
No, yeah, they see speech as a potential contagion. That's their entire official understanding of it, and not as something that is inherently creative and productive, which is the American conception of it. It's a root philosophical disagreement, right? Which was a friendly disagreement until recently. Like, in other words, the European idea was always democracy, is great, but we have to weigh the interests of the population against potential harm, right? That's been true since the late 1700s. In America, it's opposite. We just believe in free speech, like we believe in free expression. That the more of it, the better, right? And that's how we solve problems ultimately. But now we're going down this path where there's it's just irreconcilable, these two different ways of looking at things. I think
what they're trying to do is it's like a religion that's trying to conquer another religion,
right?
It's ultimately a sectarian argument in which they are saying that we don't have the right to not respect their God and speak in a way that respects their God. I don't know where it ends if they get their way. I guess
it ends with more Graham Linehan being arrested more. You know what I'm saying? That's where it ends, right?
Yeah.
So
it ends with England issuing warrants for people in New Jersey.
Right. Well, look, Graham had to move to America. An Irish screenwriter, and he comes back to the UK for like a second, and he finds himself arrested. Like, come on now, and that's where this is going. So, and I hope it doesn't go in the other direction too. It could, like, we are seeing cases of people being picked up for not for the European style speeches, but for sort of exaggerated interpretations of threats. So it's not traditional speech offense, but what they're doing is, I mean, I just think this argument has gotten to a place where it's going to be all out conflict now. So it's fascinating. Anyway, at the end of this week, Walter, I think we should do like a year in review type thing, right?
Well, what is Thursday? Is it if it's the New Year's Day, we might not have a show.
Oh yeah. Maybe we can do it. Maybe we can tape it the day before or something like that. Is that possible?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Is that possible?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out. And if you have an idea for something interesting or funny that happened this year that you think we should talk about, please let us know. Send it to, I don't know, taibbi@substack.com, and we'll take a look. And Walter, great to see you after a week. Sorry about your crappy Christmas, and hope things are better. And we'll see you all soon.
See you soon.